This is Fortress on a Hill with Henry, Danny, Kagan, Giovanni, Shiloh, Anisha, and Mike.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Fortress on the Hill, a podcast about the U.S. foreign policy, anti-imperialism, criticism, and the American way of war. I'm Giovanni, your host. I'm here with Shiloh. Shiloh, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you, and good to see you too, Meital.
Thank you for coming, Shiloh. We have a special guest today, and today's episode will confront the ongoing genocide in Gaza, where over 67,000 Palestinians, mostly civilians, including thousands of women and children, have been killed in a calculated campaign by the Israeli state under the political cover and full military support of the United States. At the heart of this devastation is the ethno-state ideology of Zionism, which centers around Jewish nationalism and Jewish supremacy, which drives the Israeli government and its military, the IDF, to finally assert control over Palestinian lands and lives. Yet, Palestinians fight for the fundamental right to live freely in their ancestral land, while some former Zionist soldiers have begun shedding the indoctrination, daring to speak out against the crimes that the state is committing. Today, we explore these intersecting struggles of survival, conscience, and hope for justice. To continue the conversation, we're honored to welcome Meital, born in 1984 in Tel Aviv, occupied Palestine. Meital is an artist and writer who is learning how to be in a human form. They work with words, moving and still images, threads, bodies in front of bodies, and with the earth itself. As a death laborer, Meital tends to a prayer for the liberation of the land of Palestine and the lands of our bodies. They keep fires and often submerge themselves in ocean and seawater, listening deeply to the waters, bird songs, caretakers, and ancestors as they walk as guests on the home and gathering places of Coahuila, Kit Nation, and Serrano. Meital is the author of a powerful book, Bloodlines, and they make offers through the True Name Collective. Today, Meital joined us to share insights from their journey from the former IDF soldiers to activists, artists, and advocate for justice and liberation. How are you doing, Meital? Thank you for coming to the show and having a conversation with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's nice to see you, Shiloh. Also, just a word about in my bio that you read, the native lands are written in the languages of each tribe. Another way to say their names is Kuya, Tongva, Serrano, and Luciano.
Right. I was trying to practice that before we got on the show, and I put it on. You know how on Google you can put it like the instance of how it sounds. I was trying to practice it, and I went over it several times, but just the time going here as we're going through this now, I was struggling with how to pronunciations. But thank you for bringing that up, though.
Yeah.
So you were in the Army or Air Force?
I was in the Air Force.
In the Air Force.
My father was an Air Force commander. Because of that, I was second generation in the enlistment. Because I was his child, I automatically was referred to the Air Force.
Oh, so I had a question because when I read the articles, the reports and everything, also in your book, when I read your book, they use Army and Air Force interchangeably. And also the articles that I've always read, those said IDF. They're really distinguished with it's the Navy or the Air Force or the Army. I was wondering, how is this structure of the Israeli military? Because the reason I asked you is I lived in Saudi Arabia for a year as a contractor, and the way they had the Saudi Arabian National Guard, and they had the MODA with the Ministry of Defense. And within the MODA, they have our versions of the Army, Air Force, and Navy all together into one force. Right? So I was wondering if it's a similar structure in Israel or is it different?
It's basically, from my understanding, it's all under the umbrella of what Israel will call the Israeli Defense Forces and what we will call the Israeli Oppression or Occupation Forces. And the separation there is, there's different units. Under the umbrella, there's different, almost like departments. And then the Air Force is kind of known within Israeli society to be that kind of like top option. I say that I did time in the Army. But the Air Force is considered to be like a perk if you go there. Pilots are considered to be elite. There's like all these ways in which there's a lot of supremacy within the system of the Army, and it plays out in who goes where. If we look at racism within Israeli society, Ashkenazi Jews who are more white presenting will usually be in the Air Force.
And I want to go back to that Ashkenazi, which you mentioned earlier, because I know that in the book you talked about different hierarchies between Ashkenazi, Mizrahi,
Sephardi.
and the Sephardic, and etc. Right. So we'll go back to that. Something interesting also. When I was reading your book, you were what we call here an Army brat. Right. I was an Army brat. Well, I guess your kids will be Air Force brat. You're the child of a military person. Like that was in the military for 26 years, I think. And I moved around a lot. I know that you also had opportunity to move with your parents also. You spent some time in Alabama, based there. There was an interesting story that you wrote in your book. First, how was your experience in that movement? Because I know I can relate to a lot of things that you say in your book. The same way you described how you saw your dad coming to pick you up at the kindergarten, the uniform, and then everybody was just such at awe watching, and I believe your father was a decorated commander as well. So you had a lot of prestige behind you. I can relate with that because the same way that you saw your father, the youngest military child at the time, I did the same thing. I used to go to my desk job and stuff there that they had, the Army stuff there, climbing the vehicles. My dad was an engineer. So I can relate to that. Can you tell a little bit about your experience in Alabama too?
So I think that is one of the most profound experiences I've had since working with Shiloh and about faith and hearing more stories of veterans here is just to see how much similarities there is. Because in a way, I think before coming to the US, my understanding was, well, in Israel, there's like mandatory army enlistment. So everyone must do their time in the army. It's not a choice. And I've always thought about the US as this place where like you choose to become a soldier. But then now when I've been educated in this system for over a decade, I understand that a lot of the time there is no choice here. The racism and every other form of oppression that lives on this land is also in the ways that people find themselves with the only option to become a soldier, to survive. And also how it is generational, how it is within the family. It is almost like a duty you are being born into and must continue. So I think there's a lot of similarities between those things. I think for me specifically, in my personal story, it was a combination of even before my father, on my maternal side, my grandparents. For the listeners that don't know me, I come from Ashkenazi Jewish lineage from Poland, Sephardi Jewish lineage from Greece, and Arab Jewish lineage from Palestine. So my maternal grandparents, my grandfather was the Arab Jewish who was from Palestine, and my grandmother came from Greece, escaped pogrom there in the 30s. They met in Palestine in the 30s, and they were both the lessee out of all the Jewish militias that were working in Palestine at the time to fight the British and the Palestinian people at the same time. The Lehi is known by Jewish as a terrorist organization. They were all terrorist organizations. They all committed terrorist acts, but the Lehi is the one that is known for it. For instance, the massacre, one of many massacres that happened during the Nakba, was committed by the Lehi. So my parents were recruiters and, soldiers for the Lehi. And my upbringing start the duty that comes from that kind of indoctrination into Zionism, which is very much by all means necessary. On my paternal side, my dad is an Air Force commander. His brother died in Yom War as a soldier in the Golani Brigade. So that kind of combination of grief, duty, and other things that we can get into later created this Zionist lineage that I was really groomed to follow. In terms of moving around, occupied Palestine is tiny. It's not like here where when you're a child of army people, you can move from one edge of the state to another and it will take you days to get there. Occupied Palestine, from the north and to the south is a 7-hour, 8-hour drive.
Right.
So within occupied Palestine, we didn't move a lot. There was one time during the Gulf War that we moved to a southern base. When I was 8 years old, there was a collaboration between the Navy and the IOF, and my dad, along with other pilots, had to move to Montgomery, Alabama for a year. I lived in Montgomery, Alabama when I was 8, didn't know English at the time, was sent to a public school. It was a very informative moment in my upbringing when I look back at it.
Yeah, one of the stories that you write there. I was close to Montgomery. I was in the School of the Americas. They changed the name to Western Hemisphere Institute for Security and Cooperation. I was in Georgia, which is about 2 hours away from Montgomery. There was another base nearby where they collaborated with where I worked, which was an institute, which a schoolhouse. Mostly what we taught was indoctrinate and teach the Latin American soldiers. And Latin American soldiers go there and we trained them. While I was there, that's the first time I actually seen Israeli soldiers visiting us. They came to visit us, a group of Israeli officers that came to visit us to see our training and stuff like that. That's the first time I've seen one. There has to be some type of collaboration, what you were talking about there with that schoolhouse there, institution in Alabama, and with pilots and whatnot. That student pilots is part of also that school as well. So who knows what they were doing there?
A year ago, I went to Tucson to offer a grief ritual. My friend lives there. And when I arrived, my friend was at my wedding a few years ago, and my dad was at my wedding. Apparently, they talked then. And my dad shared with her during my wedding that he used to train in Tucson. So I get to Tucson, and my friend is telling me, you know what, your dad trained here? And I was like, no, I had no idea. And then I was in Tucson for a few days, and Tucson really felt like an Air Force base. And then also just the relationship between Tucson and the border. And I was like, yeah, like, of course my dad trained here. Any kind of soldier from the IOF comes to bases in the US to train and vice versa, right? Like outside of Gaza, the IOF built mini Gaza, which is basically a small space where the soldiers get to train before going into Gaza. Cup cities are based on Gaza City, on mini Gaza. Like all of those things, like they don't start here and stop there or start here and stop there. There's a continuous inflow and outflow of information and tactics. ICE was invented in a law enforcement trip of US officials to Israel when they saw the tactics that Israelis are doing within airport system, that they were exposed to the surveillance, to the snipers on the wall with Gaza, to the checkpoints in the West Bank. All of that created what we know of today as ICE. So I think as much as we can undo the separation of here and there, the more that we can really understand how those systems are actually intertwined. And when we break one of them apart, it reverberate within the whole, and we just need to like keep doing that.
Go ahead, jump in there.
I was actually born on an Air Force base in Tucson. So I was like, oh, yeah, I know that base. I was going to ask you about that, though, specifically the connection of no borders, like there's no here and there, and about from your memory, how was the U.S. portrayed in Israel as you were growing up? I'm so curious about that because here it's all positive.
I think that's also all by design, right? For me, growing up, it was very much, we were indoctrinated into this Zionist, Sabar, soldier identity. There was also this desire for an American dream that we saw on TV. So the exposure we get, first of all, in Israel, very different than European countries and some Middle Eastern countries, the TV is not being translated to Hebrew. You hear it in English and you just have subtitles, which creates this connection to the language. I grew up on Beverly Hills 109 and like Melrose Place and those other TV shows that, you know, I think were kind of like I was born in 84. I'm assuming we share a decade to some capacity. So yeah, those TV shows and the US was seen as like, first of all, that like Big Brother energy of like, you know, like if I think about myself in the Gulf War, sitting in a bomb shelter with a gas mask over my face because the US was bombing Iraq and Iraq was bombing us. It's like, oh yeah, we do this for each other. They got our back and we got their back. And it's very, but from a distorted place, which it can be seen today in how Bibi treats like Trump. There's like this, like almost like kingly, like, let me put a red carpet in front of you. So I think there's this really distorted relationship of we must have the US on our side. At the same time, within Israeli society and specifically Zionist Israeli society, there's a constant need to amplify the victimhood. So it goes like, we must have the US on our side. And at the same time, they don't truly understand us and no one really understands their pain. Why is there any kind of limitation on what we can do? And, like a very kind of childish, like we need the approval of this big brother. And at the same time, I want to mess up this big brother because they put too many constraint on me and they don't understand me. And then in relation to Jewish American culture, there's a big, like, almost like a looking down at, oh, you need us to exist for your safety and we will take it on. So like give us your funds and give us your support and give us all of that. But at the same time, as much as I was raised to be Zionist and Israeli and soldier, I was also raised to be anti-Semitic towards religious Jews and American Jews, toward any kind of Jewishness or European Jews, any kind of Jewishness that reminded Jews during the Holocaust. We were trained to see it as like, that's bad, that's ugly. That is why, there's the famous saying, we were sheep going to slaughter in relation to the Holocaust. There's like, we were not strong enough, we were weak, we were feminine, we were all those things, we were people of the book. So any kind, till this very day, any kind of representation of that kind of Jewishness within Israeli culture is seen through a lens of anti-Semitism. And one of the ways that I have broken through my own indoctrination is actually returning to Jewishness and returning to Jewish practice as a way to heal that anti-Semitism that was planted inside of me.
Yeah, it's funny you said. I was listening to, I forget his name, but he was describing Zionism, and that's at the beginning where the Gaza Holocaust is happening. And he described what you were describing right there, saying about the anti-Semitism among Zionists and how Zionism, the way he described it, is pretty much muscular Jewishness.
Mm-hmm.
This idea precedes the Holocaust.
Zionism precedes, but it was not as popular before that. And after the Holocaust, there was also a lot of Jews who did not agree with Zionism and did not believe that there should be a nation state and were resisting the Zionist ideology. One of the reasons that in the end of the day, the Jews, quote unquote, receive a state was, first of all, because the European state did not want to have them back. And also it kind of solved the problem and offered the US an ally in the Middle East. It was very much in support and connection to colonialism and imperialism, that not to mention also that Jews, in relation to other people throughout history that navigated genocides of sorts, Jews are closest to white that we can see. And that is also connected to superiority and why Jews received a state and other communities of people did not.
Absolutely.
I was curious if you could talk about this idea of intense American exceptionalism when it comes to the IOF and the brutality of the IOF. Because of my work, I talk to a lot of US veterans every day, and they often have this interesting concept of how the IOF is extra brutal, but it's like this weird American exceptionalism to think that they're any different.
I think the entirety of what we know of Israel is the largest US military base in the world. There's no other way to look at it in terms of funding, in terms of technology, in terms of brutality, in terms of the indoctrination. I think there's always been, and hopefully not forever, this American notion that we're the best and everyone else can do what they do. And then where does that come from? It's like, what I want to say is that everyone is barbaristic and we're holy, right? That is the root of colonialism. It's the root of the creation of the US on Turtle Island. It's all in here. It's in imperialism. And we can see this if we look at the prison system in the US. When things leak out or where there's already an image of something, then people come to terms with what's happening here on a daily basis, right? But when it's like business normal and, it's still the country that has the most prison in the world, incarcerates most people in the world within a racial hierarchy and supremacy, then that kind of becomes the backdrop. Then all of a sudden, like, what, we commit torture? And in the same way, like recently photos from, which is like, the mirror image of what Abu Ghraib was, got leaked from Israel to the world, and all of a sudden, like, what? The IOS tortures Palestinians? And none of it happens in an instant. It happens throughout history. These forces are training each other on how to torture people, and they do it on a daily basis. For us, it's really important to keep undoing that thought that we're different. We're not as bad. There's something also interesting to me in relation to how veterans are regarded. In Israel, we have Memorial Day, where it honors all of the soldiers who died while doing their time in the army. And between that day and Holocaust Memorial Day are the most two important days. And Memorial Day ends with Independence Day. So it's like there's not even a beat between them. It's like one day bleeds into the other. We grieve for the soldier for 24 hours, and then it immediately becomes fireworks for the state, because that's a part of the indoctrination.
Like a movie, you hit the climb and you hit what we call the show stories,
Mhm.
the challenges, whatever, and then at the end,
Solution.
yeah,
Yeah. Most Holocaust memorial museums around the world that I've been in with a giant Israeli flag and like the Zionist agenda into the nation state of Israel, which saved the Jews. You go through hallways of Holocaust imagery and testimonies and come out into the light and a giant Israeli flag. All of that is by design. This is Israeli propaganda in its most obvious and in its most attractive to some people, I guess. But that's what they do. They have found a way to continuously victimize themselves while legitimizing anything they do in relation to their safety, to their need for security, defense, whatever word we want to put there. I don't know that I fully answered your question, Shiloh, but we got somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct about the strategic importance of Israel as an unsinkable aircraft carrier in West Asia. It was a British purpose, right? It was a place for them to control the routes through the Sinai, through the Suez Canal after the First World War, after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. The British and the French, they wanted to have a footprint there to control the traffic. And then when the British went to pass on to the Americans, and now the Americans pretty much control that space right there, the purpose of Israel. Apart from religion and all that, the strategic military purpose of Israel is to have a presence, a Western presence into West Asia, and to maintain this balance among the surrounding Arab states, keep them from coming together as the project of Arabism. It was to keep them separate, keeping client states to the West of the United States, and that's the purpose of Israel there, and maintaining Israeli military primacy. And you're absolutely correct with that. But also there is the religious factor here in the United States as well. Here, I live in San Antonio. Here we have what we call the Kufi. Have you heard of Kufi before? Christian Friends of Israel, Christian United Israel, something like that, right? Here's the headquarters is here in San Antonio. And it's the pastor his name is John Hagee, right? He's an evangelist, and they own a huge block. You drive by their church, it's like a big old temple. They have TV, they have schools and everything, right? And it's like a multi-million-dollar enterprise that they have. Right? They don't pay taxes. And they are active in funding settlements, funding. I know you're talking about the Brooklyn Jew moving to the settlements, and that's one of their projects, to fund those movements for Americans to Israel and not only tour, but also to settle.
Yeah, most of the settlement organization in Israel have like a sister organization in the US that funds their enterprise on the land, aside from government funds and IOF protection that they need to settle and continue the illegitimate existent Jews within occupied Palestine. But yeah, I mean, the Kufi and in general, the notion of Christian Zionism is something that in our work for Palestinian liberation, in our work to end funding for the Israeli government and the Israeli military, a lot of that has to do with undoing the indoctrination of Christian Zionism. And really, there's like the folks that believe in the story that Jews are the ones that will be on the land when the Messiah return. And then the world will become again, and they will have the choice between converting and going to heaven or dying with everyone else in the fire of what's left. And that, like, how to make someone not believe in that story, I don't know how to do that. I know that I was raised in a lot of stories that I don't believe in anymore. I believe that there is a way. I don't have the specific Christian upbringing to penetrate that fully. I can try from my own experiences. But I think there's also just in general, if we look at the more Christian Zionism / evangelical ideology of the land belongs to the Jews. The land belonged to the Jews among many other people. There were always Arabs and Jews and Christians and other people from other religions on the land. I say this as someone raised within a Zionist identity. I don't get to imagine Palestine when Palestine is free. I get to support that vision arriving. Palestinians are the ones that will envision their land once the land is free. If they decide Jews are welcome to be there, then Jews will be welcome to be there. I, for one, like in my prayer, that is a part of this book, Bloodlines, which is a prayer to bring the Israeli identity and state to a loving and caring death. I am looking forward for the day that I will be able to offer my parents' home back to a Palestinian family returning home. Like that to me is the healing of my own generational cycle of like, we are offering this back, right? It's like the place where right of return and land back meet. But in terms of what that means to Christian Zionists, and that is work that we must invest in right now, because otherwise we have an entire people invested in this Zionist project for reasons beyond Judaism. How do we make sure that as we do that work, we also find an alternative identity, story, ideology, and a healing process so that they can also understand that this vision of the land is their own ownership of land, and they don't get to own any land. None of us get to own any land. How do we, as a collective on this planet Earth, return to this true belonging with the earth that has no ownership and has no land? Yeah. And may Jesus help us.
Absolutely. Meital, let's get to your book, Bloodlines. Your book is very raw. It's very deeply personal look into the Israeli apartheid system through the eyes of someone that's part of it, very vividly, poetic, blending personal reflection with powerful storytelling. You trace your family's history in surviving fascism and Nazi persecution in Eastern Europe, where you bounce around between Eastern Poland to the Soviet Union to what's today's Ukraine, and being raised in a Zionist environment afterwards, your family migrating from your paternal side, migrating to Israel in the 1950s, and as they did there. We talk a lot about assimilation, how they were put to assimilate to the state's ideology to become Israelis. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it connects to what we talked about earlier in relation to this militarized identity of the Israeli. My paternal family, when they arrived, my dad was already 1 year old, and then his brother was born a few years later. They were also Ashkenazi Jews, so they were offered a lot of opportunity and privileges as newly migrates to the state that other folks from Sephardic and Mizrahi lineages from Northern Africa and other Arab states did not receive the resources to really resettle and start this new life. But in order to start this new life, they had to give up a lot of, whether it was language, interest, the way that they raised their kids, a lot of the things had to shift. And something that happened in the generation of what we will call my parents' generation, the first generation after the Holocaust, is a lot of them were ashamed at their parents. A lot of them were ashamed that happened. They were ashamed that they didn't have family members, that their families were really small, that they only had, each parent maybe had one other or not at all family member. There was this understanding of what was lost and grief that was also not fully digested by the people who survived it, that then got moved into the bodies of the children who were raised within the Zionist ideology that taught them to change their names, that they have to have Zionist Israeli names. The first thing my father and his brother did when they were 18 years old was to change their last name from a more Polish sounding last name to Yaniv, which is a very Israeli sounding name. My father, for most of his life when he was growing up, was ashamed of the food that his parents made. He wanted to eat the food that the land made, which is also food that was stolen from Palestinians. So there are all these ways in which they were raised into this extremely masculine, extremely patriarchal, extremely militarized shape of a soldier from a very young age, and had to remove everything that came before. From that indoctrination, you have my generation, that the ancestral language that my family spoke, Yiddish, Ladino, Arabic, all of those languages stopped with them. Most of them are languages that my parents knew in some capacity, and they did not move them. So I was raised in a generation where we only speak Hebrew and English. That assimilation is continuing to this very day. What I try to do in Bloodlines is really resurface all of those generational wounds that did not get a chance to be grieved or tended to, because I believe that it's our duty not to go to the army, but instead to actually drown in those wounds. And from that drowning, find the healing and movement of how we undo what the inability to drown in those wounds created for so many generations since. I hope that makes sense.
I wanted to ask you, Meital, like concrete ways, learning from you and with you around your own personal transformation is so beautiful and inspiring. What are some concrete ways that you transformed?
Yeah, thank you. I do feel like this will be my life. I constantly find more and more things that need to be removed, shed, digested, thrown away. If there's a through line, that's what the book is talking about. I see the indoctrination starting in the womb. From that moment of being sewn army uniform on my little baby body inside a womb to this very day. Something happened when I was 18 and I left the army. I left the army after 6 months, and I wanted to kill myself in that moment because it was something that my body had to do. And at the same time, something that I was so shamed about doing because it was against everything I was raised to be. And I kind of didn't understand how to continue my life because this was supposed to be my life. If I see a through line from that birth moment to that 18-year-old, the army, to today, what I keep finding is more embodiment. So the more that I have connection with my body, which is our water and earth and fire and air, like our bodies are elements of life that we can see reflected to us when we look at plants, when we look at animals, when we look at the sky, when we look at any living thing, we have the same elements in us. And the more that I have connection to that core knowing, the more I have capacity to surface the traumas. I'm also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. That took a lot of restructuring to be able to surface everything that happened, everything that I had to dissociate for my own survival, which again, I don't see that separated from the militarization of our society. I think that childhood sexual abuse and people in army, police, and other boots is very connected. That's in the next book, a different conversation. I think in general, I can say that the more that I'm able to surface and realize and find out about my own life, the more I'm able to piece those memories together, the more embodiment I find, the less shame I carry because this body is not my own. This body is held by generations of bodies that have been trying to get free from the beginning of time. And when I'm able to ground myself and feel whether it's well ancestors, whether it's other spirit ancestors, the way that each one of us is fully held, the way that our backspace is fully supported, and all we have to do is lift our hands and lean back and be held while holding and allow that to continue, the less room there is for, am I good enough? How do I carry the shame of what I've done as a soldier? All the other things that I'm sure people who will listen to this show and people in About Face are facing on a daily basis, how to live with the knowledge of what we were indoctrinated to do. We didn't know another way. When we start piecing those things together, when we find our body as a part of an earth body, there's so much more support and capacity. It really becomes a journey to free our hearts. Our hearts were never in uniform. They were covered by armors. They were covered by tanks. They were covered by whatever they needed to be covered in order for us to become the soldiers that we were indoctrinated to be. So in the shedding of all of that, our heart was always free. And the more that we can find that regional relationship and connection, the more I think we have capacity to heal. And for me, it's really about the body, an embodiment of all that this body is able and unable to do.
Thank you, Meital. I look forward to that second conversation you're talking about. It's something I think a lot about. It's the militarization of societies and our bodies and the attempted militarization of our hearts and souls.
Yeah.
You have to go, but I love you so much.
I love you so much. It was so nice to see you.
See you next week.
Oh, yeah. It's coming up. Okay.
You have a couple more minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank
you for coming on. Meital, some of the things that I picked up from the book that really jumped at me, your analysis on assimilation, me being Dominican, Puerto Rican, and coming here to the United States. I was born here, but I grew up between New York and Puerto Rico. My first formative years, then my dad joined the military and we started traveling around. As a person coming from Latin America, we feel that pressure of assimilation. In the context of Puerto Rico, which is the U.S. colony since like 1898, there's this torn identity amongst people. We see Puerto Ricans who have fully embraced their colonial status and their relationship with the United States, and they defend it, typically in the military. They become more Americans than Americans, right? But then you have the other people who have not embraced that, who see themselves as Puerto Ricans and see Americans as foreigners, and they're Puerto Ricans. So travel within those two communities, that dualism in our mind. You talk about assimilation, you talk about erasure. I saw a lot of parallels with the history of the United States and in Israel being what, a 75-year-old state, right? And the United States.
I think 77 now.
Right. So it's like a mini United States in
Absolutely.
in 7 years, right? And where it has from 200 years to 77 years, package right there happening, different
Absolutely.
different mixture of people come from different parts of the world, in your case, Ashkenazi Jews, right, which mostly were Central Eastern European, right? You have the Black, right? On your mother's side,
The Sephardic Jews and then Arab Jews from Palestine.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? And you mentioned also the Ethiopian Jews, and which is interesting.
Mhm.
Which is that found also that during the 60s there was a Black Panther Party in
There was.
but yeah, so a lot of those, so I can relate to a lot of this. Three things that you talked about: the association, assimilation, and erasure. Erasure being pretty much erasing your culture, but also the other.
Yes.
You mentioned you also had the testimony from that soldier from breaking the signs, and where they're totally blanked out and erased about those children they were harassing. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think in terms of erasure, looking at the US as a prism from which we can see the occupation of Palestine in the future, or looking at Palestine today from a past lens of Turtle Island, there's a lot of information there that can really support us. I think that's one of the reasons why I, in my practice, try to intertwine land back and right of return. Those movements feel really interconnected to me. When we see a lot of indigenous tribes in Turtle Island these days, and a lot of them are in processes of returning to the land and reestablishing the native languages and practices. And we still, they're still in Turtle Island through US institutions. There's still so much that was stolen and still kept in archived. Whether it's ritual materials, entire bodies are still in archives. So I think there's a way in which what the level of erasure that has happened here, we can see how deep it went. And as much as there's so much work to uncover it, it's going to take more generations coming together to really uncover everything that was stolen, everything that was erased, everything that was brutally taken. In Palestine, what we see today is that every Palestinian person that I know in the diaspora and in Palestine knows the name of the village and where it is that their grandparents were forcefully expelled, raped out of, killed in 1948 when the state of Israel was established. That memory has not been lost. everyone know where they have a right to return to in terms of recipes, rituals, practices, language, and plants, and ancestral knowledge. It's all alive. It's all here. We have a sacred opportunity to end this colonization before it gets to a place where in a few generations, Palestinians do not have access to that ancestral knowledge, where too much has been erased, where too many bodies have been killed, where too much land has been buried under Zionist occupation, where too many olive trees were burned by Zionist soldiers. We have this opportunity to stop the erasure and offer the land back to its people, offer the people back to its land. It's like the land of Palestine is alive and waiting for the Palestinian people to return to the practices and land tending that they know how to do ancestrally and beyond. The erasure that has happened within Jewish lineages that has created what we know of as the Israeli state and society, that erasure also can be removed from the land. We can also become diasporic again, as we've been for hundreds of years, and know that there is a belonging in the diaspora, in being a Jew in the diaspora. That is how our tradition historically has survived and thrived.
Population of what? 7 million, right?
Right?
The Israeli population,
I believe.
you mentioned that the diaspora was out. There are more Puerto Ricans that live in the United States than in Puerto Rico. I believe Judaism is treated as an ethnicity. It's seen as an ethnicity. Here, well, I'm not sure if you say that way. I read it. In the United States, so roughly around the same amount of population, Jewish people identify Judaism as about the same size of the Israeli population. And Argentina, for example, has the largest Jewish population in South America. And, you know, you have the Ethiopian Jews, you have even other communities of Judaism.
So in the number of American Jews is the same number as Israelis?
That's what I was looking. I was looking at similar people who identify with the religion of Judaism or the cultural tradition of Judaism, right? Because a lot of people are not practicing culturally Jewish.
I mean, but if you look at it from like a ethnicity, which is how the state will look at it,
right?
If you're Jewish, whether you practice it or not.
Even in the Dominican Republic, we do have a tiny Jewish population in the Dominican Republic. They have in the 1930s, around 300 families. They were German Jews. They moved there and they established, they were given land. They were given land community there as well. But yes, so that resonate with that diasporic, right? Because the state is seeing Judaism as an ethnicity, but in fact, it's more of a culture and tradition, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
So I grew up Catholic.
Judaism has been diasporic for the majority of time that we know of people being on this planet. I don't know.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Yeah.
Talking to us, sharing your knowledge, your insights, and your experience with us. Thing that you want, last comments before we depart.
Thank you so much for having me. Really grateful. I think last words would be just if we can all really center ourselves here in the privilege of living in the belly of empire and knowing that the only way we stop the Israeli army and society and government from not only committing a genocide, but from the practice of ethnic cleansing and occupation that have been on the land from the moment that Israel came into existence. It really comes down to the U.S. stopping to support Israel financially and otherwise. And we can make that change from here. In this moment in time, living here, we are complicit in so many other genocides happening around the world, in Sudan, in the Congo, and just to keep asking ourselves, how am I feeding empire today? So empire is because we are. For empire to not be anymore, we all need to stop feeding it. My question to us all on a daily basis is, how am I feeding empire today, and how can I cut that tie?
Absolutely.
And may Palestine be free in our lifetime.
Palestine be free. Let's see.
Thank you so much.
When's the next book coming out?
I don't know yet when the next book is coming out. It's being written, so probably within a year or two. In terms of finding my work, I'm on Instagram under Bloodlines _book. You can also find my offering. I do energy work and death work through True Name Collective. and that is on our website, truenamecollective.com. Bloodlines has its own website, bloodlinesbook.com. It was published by Communities of Memory, which is where you can buy a copy.
Explain that. What's death work? And I'm not, there was a quote that I found in your book that I'm looking for it now in my notes.
In the book, there's a death prayer for the Israeli identity state. Death work.
For loving and caring death.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So death work for me, first of all, it's just supporting people who are actively dying in their process of dying through supporting their caregivers, supporting them in the process that they're in. I also work with not currently dying, also known as not currently ill, very much alive and young people in relation to getting advanced directive support together, especially folks from the queer and trans communities, in which a lot of the time the folks that we want to care for us are not our blood family, and advanced directive can support in that. I also support people in dead name rituals and other ways in which, just from hearing a little bit about my story, there's so many death cycles we go through spiritually.
Right.
Part of my death work and energy work is to support people in that process.
You related to the state of Israel, like, in order for it to save itself, it needs to die.
Not to save itself, it just needs to die in order for us to.
The way you said it in a book is very poetic. Kind of like cleansing type of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
again.
Peter.
Everybody, thank you for joining us today. Thank you again, Meital. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Speaking to you again in the future. Take care.
Thank you, Giovanni. Bye.
Money is tight these days for everyone. Penny pinching to make it through the month often doesn't give people the funds to contribute to a creator they support. So we consider it the highest honor that folks help us fund the podcast in any dollar amount they're able. Patreons is the main place to do that. In addition, any support we receive makes sure we can continue to provide our main episodes free for everyone. And for supporters who can donate $10 a month or more, they will be listed right here as an honorary producer, like these fine folks. Fahim's Everyone Dream, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Janet Hansen, Ren Jacob, and Helgeberg. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our store on Spreadshirt for some great Fortress merch. We're on Twitter and Facebook.com/Fortress on a Hill. You can find our full collection of episodes at www.fortressonahill.com. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.